Hello there. Recently a video was uploaded to the main video website of Jehovah's Witnesses, and what follows are just a few of the remarks from the opening minutes.
Let's read Psalm 54:6, the entire verse. Psalm 54:6. It starts out as we have already considered, I will sacrifice to you willingly, but then it says, I will praise your name, O Jehovah, for it is good. More directly said, really, it's Jehovah is good. His name is good, but he is good. And everything he requires of us is good. There's no command from God for his servants that is bad. It's always for our benefit. Even the elimination of the wicked really is good, because it shows love for those who just want to live in peace and worship their great God in joy and happiness. So that's also something that's very good, what he's going to do. So why wouldn't we want to offer sacrifices to our great God willingly?
Okay, so there's quite a lot to unpack there, and I found those comments so interesting that I thought they merited some kind of video response. First of all, there is William Malenfant's suggestion or claim. That is, by the way, William Malenfant, who is a governing body helper. There's William Malenfant's claim that there is nothing that God requires of his worshippers, specifically of Jehovah's Witnesses, that is bad. So everything that the religion of Jehovah's Witnesses requires of them is beneficial. That's the claim that we've just heard, paraphrased. There is also this claim, rather disturbing and chilling claim, that the goodness of God extends to his plans to cleanse the earth of basically everyone who doesn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness, aka the wicked ones. Now, I thought the best way to approach responding to William Malenfant was to list 10 ways in which the beliefs and teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses will leave you worse off. And I'm hoping that this video will be of some benefit if you happen to be a Jehovah's Witness. Maybe you just want to see what the best arguments are, what the other side is saying, and kudos to you for taking that approach. Or it could be that you're studying with Jehovah's Witnesses, and again, you just want to compare and see, what the cautionary words are from those who have been Jehovah's Witnesses. And I am a former Jehovah's Witness. I used to be an elder at one point, so I do know a little bit about the religion. Now, I'm going to do a descending list, sort of in order of priority, but I'm going to start the list because it's still fresh in our minds with this claim that, again, the cleansing of the earth of wicked ones. I found it interesting, his choice of words. I think he said, even that is good.
Even the elimination of the wicked really is good.
Implying that there might be some doubt in people's minds, that it might not be good. And I think that's very telling, because when you are a Jehovah's Witness, it does nag a little that you are basically advocating for the earth to be cleansed of everyone who doesn't agree with you. That's the end game of the Jehovah's Witness faith. That's what you're working towards. Surely straight away there should be red flags. What exactly is a wicked person? Well, again, and if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, I've made several videos about this already. A wicked person, if you check Watchtower literature, is quite simply someone who doesn't want to be a Jehovah's Witness. Those are the ones that are going to be destroyed in Armageddon. And if you're doubting, if you're saying, no, that's a load of nonsense, this guy's lying, straight away, by all means, look at Watchtower Library. Hopefully you've got Watchtower Library on your computer. Make it your personal study project to see who will be destroyed at Armageddon. And I think you'll find that it's basically anyone who isn't a Jehovah's Witness. By the way, this fixation with Armageddon and the end of the world and the wicked being destroyed has a rather ugly side effect, which is that it makes you think less of those around you, especially if you're a young person at school, or perhaps you're an older Jehovah's Witness who works in an office or works with people who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses. It gives you a very poor perception of the people around you when you are required to think of them as basically Armageddon fodder. If Armageddon were to come tomorrow, you are required to think of these people as basically disposable, as people who you have to feel comfortable seeing dying around you when the great day of wrath comes. That is not a healthy way to think of people in your community. And isn't it interesting that when describing this to his audience, William Malenfant said, because it's a loving thing, because we who worship God, we just want to be left alone.
Even the elimination of the wicked really is good, because it shows love for those who just want to live in peace and worship their great God in joy and happiness.
Listen, William Malenfant, you are allowed to live your life the way you want right now. If you could please name me one thing that you're prevented from doing when it comes to your worship as a Jehovah's Witness, I would love to hear it. Because unless you're living in Russia, or unless you're living in one of the countries where the work of Jehovah's Witnesses is under ban, you're basically allowed to do what you like to quite a startling degree. I mean, you're allowed to turn down medicine for yourself if you're dying. That's the extent to which you're allowed to practice your faith. So I can't quite figure out where he gets this idea that wicked people, i.e. non-Jehovah's Witnesses, are coming between him and his worship, which is the insinuation that's made. That's point number 10. We're now going to move down to point number 9. If you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you have to deny science. I'm sorry, there's no more straightforward way of putting it. And again, if you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, you're saying, total nonsense. We accept what scientists say. Oh, really? Well, I would love to be in a room with you the next time you're watching a nature documentary and it's mentioned that the species that's being looked at is the product of evolution. I would love to see what you say to the television when that fact is mentioned. You're going to deny it. And at this point you're going to say, well, evolution's just a theory. Listen, if that's your argument, please go away and look at what the word theory means in a scientific context. Because I think you'll find that evolution is a fact. It's not questioned by the scientific community. You will really struggle to find anyone with scientific credentials who knows about evolution, who understands the mechanisms behind it, and says that it's not true, that it's not the way life has developed over many millions of years. And yet again, when you're a Jehovah's Witness, you are required to say that evolution is a false teaching. That's the official line. So you have to disagree with scientists, with the scientific community. When you read Watchtower literature, they will frequently quote from scientists, when it's convenient for them. If they need to establish the date of a fragment or something like that, they're happy to use carbon dating in those sorts of arguments. But when it comes to evolution, when it comes to the amount of time, for example, that humans have been on the planet, and we now know that modern Homo sapiens have been around for at least a couple 100,000 years, and Homo sapiens have been evolving for millions of years. We're digging up fossilized remains of humans that are millions of years old, proving that there has been this development. Again, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you have to deny all that. And if you're going to live your life denying science, I would argue that you're worse off, and your children are certainly worse off. And before I move on, I just want to add that it's not just evolution that you have to deny. There's lots of other areas in which you frankly have to deny the knowledge and experience and expertise of experts if they tell you something that doesn't fit in with the Watchtower narrative. For example, we know that Jerusalem wasn't destroyed by the Babylonians in 607 BCE. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check out my video on that subject. You will find that the established date in history for the destruction of Jerusalem by King Nebuchadnezzar or King Nebuchadnezzar's forces is 587 BCE. We know this because the Babylonians were meticulous when it came to keeping records. In fact, it would be difficult to find a period in history where it would be more difficult to make up a date than the Neo-Babylonian period of history, because they kept records of everything. And by matching cuneiform tablets, cuneiform documents with astrological observations, it's possible to pinpoint exactly when the destruction of Jerusalem would have been, and it most certainly was not 607 BCE. So it's not just science that you need to deny, it's also the findings of scholars and archaeologists and historians. The flood of Noah, you have to believe that was a literal event that literally covered every part of the planet. That all of the earth was overwhelmed by the floodwaters of Noah, a physical impossibility if you do your research into it. But as a Jehovah's Witness, you must basically put your fingers in your ears, and when people who have devoted their entire lives to better understanding these fields of knowledge tell you something that contradicts your beliefs, you've basically got to ignore them. Point number 8, your career opportunities will be limited if you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses. If you don't believe me, watch some of the recent JW broadcasting material and the recent videos that have been released at the Don't Give Up convention, the Remember the Wife of Lot drama, and note the loathing and the distrust and the contempt with which decent careers are held in Watchtower propaganda. In Watchtower materials, a false dichotomy is constantly presented, whereby you can either be a lover of God, in other words, a Jehovah's Witness, or a lover of riches. Those are the only two options, apparently, for anybody. And if you aren't taking your beliefs as a Jehovah's Witness seriously by observing all of the requirements that are placed on you, whether it's pioneering, whether it's meeting attendance, whether it's reaching out for responsibilities as a man in the organization, if you're not doing that, well, it must be because you're distracted by riches. And anybody who decides that they want to better themselves or make a priority out of providing for their families is stigmatized. Similar to point number 8 is point number 7. Not just your career opportunities, but specifically your educational opportunities will be limited as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And this particularly applies if you happen to be watching this as a young Jehovah's Witness who's perhaps going through high school. You need to really think about the possibility of going to college and university when you're at this age. This is the age for you to be absorbing knowledge, for you to be absorbing skills, so that when it comes time to find work, you have as many opportunities as possible, not just to earn money. Careers are not just about earning money. It's also about personal fulfillment. It's about happiness. It's about providing for your family. It's about contributing to mankind, especially if you're going to be a doctor or a scientist and you're doing something that is just moving humanity forward incrementally. There are so many benefits to furthering your education through college and university. But when you're a Jehovah's Witness, college, university, higher education is heavily stigmatized. As I said earlier, Watchtower comes first in everything. So if you're a young person, you are expected to pour all of your energies, all of your time into serving Watchtower in some form, whether it's through going to Bethel or being a pioneer or going to one of the schools. It has to be Watchtower that comes first. And this is quite clearly going to benefit Watchtower rather than you. Point number 6, sexual repression. When you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you have your life micromanaged for you. And this extends even into your love life, your sex life, who you are allowed to be romantically attracted to, whether you can love someone of the same gender, whether you're old enough to have a relationship. All of these things are areas in which Watchtower enforces its theology. So to give you an example, again, you could be a young Jehovah's Witness watching this. It could be that you are attracted to someone at high school, but you're not allowed to have a relationship with them because according to Watchtower materials, the only people you're allowed to have a relationship with are those that you can marry, and the only people you can marry are fellow Jehovah's Witnesses. So this immediately limits your options when it comes to finding a future partner. To make matters worse, if you do happen to struggle with finding yourself a suitable husband or wife from the small pool of Jehovah's Witnesses that you know, you're not even allowed to masturbate. So really your body is again micromanaged to an extraordinary degree, a degree that is really not healthy, and a degree that I would argue really does lead to some serious hang-ups and emotional problems further down the line. And that's before we even think about homosexuality and the nightmare it must be if you're raised as a Jehovah's Witness despite being gay or lesbian. You literally have to completely ignore your nature and be attracted to the opposite sex even though you're not attracted to them. Point number 5, if you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you will no longer be in control of yourself. And this is quite a common thing in many cults, but particularly in Jehovah's Witnesses, it's astonishing the areas of your life that will be micromanaged once you get baptized or even before you get baptized. And to highlight this, I want you to take a look at this graphic that is from the official website, jw.org. Just take a look at that image and that caption. If you gave a friend a car as a gift, you would neither keep the keys nor insist on driving it yourself. Similarly, when you dedicate or give yourself to Jehovah, you hand over total ownership of yourself to him. Now, it's interesting and actually quite frustrating when you read Watchtower materials, the way Jehovah and Jehovah's organization and Watchtower are all terms that are used interchangeably. In fact, Watchtower is very rarely used as a term. It's all Jehovah this, Jehovah that, when in actual fact, it's the organization. It's literally the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses who are taking the Bible and saying, we get to decide what this book says. You guys have to all agree with us or you will die at Armageddon. And by the way, we've decided that these verses mean that you mustn't do X, Y, Z to an extraordinary degree. I mean, one of the most frustrating things for me, one of the most irritating areas of control, you might say, when I was a Jehovah's Witness, was the fact that you can't even decide for yourself who your friends are. When you're a Jehovah's Witness, you have to have your friends decided for you, and your friends are essentially anyone else who is a Jehovah's Witness. So literally anyone in your community, no matter how antisocial they are, no matter how rude they are, no matter how appalling they are to be around, if they become one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you have to be friends with them. And if they want to work with you on the ministry, you can try if you like to deny them that, but sooner or later you're going to get spoken to if you keep giving them the cold shoulder because you don't like them. Only in cults do you find that, where friendship is compulsory, where you don't have freedom to decide who you're going to spend time with. In Jehovah's organization, you are required to spend time with everybody. You're supposed to widen out, is the expression. with everybody who is similarly taking their beliefs seriously. Point number 4, if you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses, specifically if you are a Jehovah's Witness parent, you should know that your children are more likely to be at risk from sexual predators. And this is a serious issue that you really need to do research on if you weren't previously aware of it. Basically, I would recommend that you go on Google and research the Australian Royal Commission Jehovah's Witnesses. They held Case Study 29 in 2015 and required Watchtower in Australia to produce all of its documents related to child abuse. And what they found was astonishing. Going back as far as 1950, it had been discovered that there had been 1,006 pedophiles brought to the attention of Watchtower through the congregations, and yet not a single one of them had been reported to the police. Now, unfortunately, it's not just in Australia that Watchtower has been found covering up child abuse on an industrial scale. Over a number of years now, there have been many lawsuits in countries like the United States and Britain where Watchtower have been discovered mishandling child abuse by basically telling elders not to report to authorities. I go into this subject more in my YouTube video, Jehovah's Witnesses and Child Abuse, Is There a Problem? So again, if you're in the dark as to why it's so common for children to be put in harm's way in Jehovah's Witnesses, I would urge you to check out that video. But bottom line, if you're a Jehovah's Witness and you have children, you really need to examine this evidence and really think hard about whether you want to be raising your children in an organisation that will so readily put them in harm's way. And speaking of putting children in harm's way, let's talk about point number 3. You could die refusing blood. Not just you, but if you are, again, a Jehovah's Witness parent, you are required to let your child die rather than accept a blood transfusion. Let's go back to what William Malenfant was telling us earlier. He said that if you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses, every teaching, every belief, everything that you're required to do in your religion is positive, is beneficial for you. How can it be beneficial for you to die as a result of refusing blood? How can it be beneficial for you to watch your child die on a hospital bed when all it would take to save them would be a blood transfusion? Again, it's an almost impossible scenario to get your head around. And if you're watching this as a Jehovah's Witness parent, I can imagine you saying, well, that's never going to happen. But there's the possibility that it could happen. And if you're so sure that about the blood teaching, if you're so sure that Jehovah doesn't want you to accept blood, then you really need to ask yourself how you would feel making that call. You know, making that decision that you're ready to let your child go. Isn't it worthwhile taking a step back at this point now, before that happens, and really examining the blood teaching objectively? Because I know what you're thinking watching this. You're thinking, well, I'm sorry, there may be other issues with Jehovah's Witnesses. They may have a problem with child abuse, blah, blah, blah. But on blood transfusions, they are absolutely spot on. It does say in the Bible, you should abstain from blood. Where's the confusion? Well, lots of people around the world believe the Bible. And lots of people who believe the Bible believe it fanatically. They really do take every word literally, to the point of, for example, I think it's in Kentucky, building a Noah's Ark museum and teaching that that the world is only 6,000 years old. That's how seriously people take what's written in the Bible. And even those creationists like Ken Ham and Ray Comfort aren't going around saying the Bible is against blood transfusions. And the reason they're not doing that is quite simple. The Bible cannot be against something that hadn't been invented when the Bible was being written. How can you possibly say that when they're talking about abstaining from blood, they're talking about abstaining from blood for medical purposes. And this is where you'll say, oh, well, if it says blood, then obviously that would also include transfusing it. Well, would it? Because in the Bible, there are examples of Jesus having conversations with the Pharisees where they were applying the Mosaic law to an outrageous degree, where they would even be willing to put human health and well-being on the line. And he gave the example, Jesus gave the example, I believe, of, you know, if your cattle fell into a pit on the Sabbath, would you leave it to die in the pit because you're not allowed to do any work on the Sabbath, or would you get it out? And when making that argument, he applied to a rabbinic principle called pikuach nefesh. And what pikuach nefesh essentially means, I mean, I'm not Jewish, this is what I've learned. It means that if there is a conflict between what the Bible says and some action that could result in loss of life or damage to human life should take priority. And that was a very basic provision that Jesus appealed to. But apparently Jehovah's Witnesses are allowed to be Pharisaic, and they're allowed to, you know, follow everything to a ludicrous degree, to the point where if it says abstain from blood, well, that means the child on the hospital bed needs to die rather than have a blood transfusion. Even though it's only talking about eating blood, never mind. We're not going to give them any medical treatments involving blood. This is clearly ludicrous. And bottom line, it could kill you. Well, I say could kill you, it is killing people. We don't know how many people it's killing. There's been some who have suggested that it could be into the tens of thousands by now. How many people have died due to Watchtower's blood teaching, which only came in, I think, in 1945. So since 1945, who knows what the carnage has been due to the teaching on blood transfusions. But it can't be a good thing for you to literally die because of your beliefs. Point number 2, shunning. If you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses, Jehovah's organization comes first and family comes second. That means that if one of your family members makes a conscientious decision to stop being one of Jehovah's Witnesses, they are to be shunned. You must break off all contact with them. They might have really good reasons. They might be really genuine in their reasons. They may have found some real injustice that can't be explained. Some scandal or some double standard or something that proves categorically that their beliefs don't hold up to scrutiny. And you're still expected to cast them out of your family. And this is again where lots of Jehovah's Witnesses would say, oh, well, that's God's command. As William Malenfant was saying, God is good. So if God commands something, incidentally, God is good is another way of saying God is great. And God is great is Allahu Akbar, I think, is what Muslims say, including, and I know not all Muslims are terrorists, but that's what terrorists scream just as they're about to plow a vehicle into a crowd, or just as they're about to blow themselves up. You know, just because someone says God is good doesn't mean that the thing that they are excusing with that argument is necessarily good. Anybody can make that claim about more or less anything. What you need to do is look at the specifics. And when it comes to shunning, when it comes to families being literally broken apart because somebody has stopped being one of Jehovah's Witnesses for whatever reason, there is never an excuse for it. What Jehovah's Witnesses will always say is, oh, it's God's command. If God commands it, we've got to do it. Okay, if you're going to say it's God's command, you have to accept that it's only been God's command since 1981. It was in 1981, specifically the September 15th, 1981 Watchtower. Find it on Watchtower Library if you don't believe me. It was in that watchtower that the door slammed shut, that it became impossible to leave the organisation gracefully. Before 1981, it was possible for people who disassociate to still have contact with their family. It was possible to keep those bonds going. In 1981, boom. Apparently that was when God commanded that there should be no graceful way to stop being a Jehovah's Witness. So if you really want to say it's a Bible command, apparently it's just been a Bible command since 1981. And finally, last but by no means least, point number one, numero uno, it's not true. The beliefs and teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses are not true. How can you possibly be better off as one of Jehovah's Witnesses if you are committing your entire life with no easy way to get out? You're committing your entire life to something that is not true. And at this point you could be saying, oh, well, I know it's true. Of course it's true. We call it the truth. There's all of these signs and all of these evidences that have convinced me that it's true. If you're so convinced that what you have is true, you should be able to convince the most skeptical minds that what you have is true. But what I think you will find, and what I think you actually know, if you've got this far in the video, is that nothing that is taught in Watchtower literature, none of the exclusive teachings or exclusive claims made by Jehovah's Witnesses, and specifically the governing body, nothing can be objectively proven. How do you possibly prove that Jesus came to earth and between 1914 and 1919 took a look at all of the religions and saw Watchtower and said, that's my one true religion, that's my faithful slave, and I will appoint its leaders to form an unbroken line of authority stretching all the way into the 21st century? How do you possibly prove that? You can't prove it. And at this point you could say, well, it's a matter of faith. I have to have faith that this is what happened. Isn't that what any religion could say? If you were speaking to a Mormon, if you were speaking to a Muslim, if you were speaking to a Hindu, and they come at you with these sort of fanciful, outrageous theologies that just sound so far-fetched, couldn't they also say, oh, well, it's just a matter of faith? At some point, you have to ask yourself, is it worthwhile committing my entire life to something that is, at the very least, no more true or no more provable than any other religion? And that's that for me trumps all of the other things, because regardless of any of the earlier points that we've discussed, if the religion isn't true, it's just not worth it. So that's about all I've got time for. I just wanted to, again, if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses or you're studying with Jehovah's Witnesses, I wanted to give you a few things to ponder. If there's anything that I've said in this video that doesn't sound right or sounds like I might be making it up, do the research. Check it on Google, check it on Watchtower Library. The great thing about Watchtower literature, and you'll see I've got quite a lot of it behind me, is that it's one of the best ways, in fact, to discover that the Jehovah's Witness religion is, isn't worth believing in. Because when you study the literature going all the way back to Russell's time, you notice that they've just been making claim after claim after claim, and none of it's come true. It just keeps getting repackaged and regurgitated every year. So it really isn't worthwhile. Life is too short to, waste it on this. And again, that's ultimately why you're worse off if you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses. But the good news is that if you are involved with Jehovah's Witnesses, there is life on the other side, and there is the possibility of shaking off your indoctrination and starting a new life, no matter how complicated your life is right now. So anyway, I hope all of that has been useful. I've been Lloyd Evans, you're watching my John Cedars channel, and if you want to see more videos like this, please don't forget to subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching.